hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense about how things are set up. So if I turn over to my colleague, Tori Parada, who's going to give you a live demo.
Okay, thanks, Callie. You guys are going to have to bear with for a second because while I start sharing, the screen is going to go black for just a minute. Here we go. And I'm going to maximize it, so hopefully it's clear to everybody. If it's not, definitely drop us a line in the chat box that it's not clear for you. But hopefully this is, it looks good to everybody. I believe, Callie, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's an option for folks to use a full screen. That'll help as well if you can find the full screen option and make it bigger on your screen. So Callie just went over kind of a brief overview, and so that hopefully as we look through the system, that stuff will kind of make a lot more sense. I know probably a lot of you were there for our walkthrough at the October meeting. But this will go into a little bit more detail, and we've also added some features since then, so some of it will be new. So this is your TTA 360 homepage. So those unique URLs that Callie talked to you about, they will take folks here. So whether they come from OJJDP NTTAC's website or whether they come from your website, this is the homepage that they'll come to. And one thing I want to mention is that by close of business today, there'll be some changes to this website, this landing page here. And some of those changes just include adding FAQs for requesters, adding that document, which is in your documents pod that you can download, which is kind of a how do I submit TTA thing for requesters. It tells them how to create an account. It tells them how to submit a request, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll also be adding some videos that are specific to requesters. So they're just little video tutorials that go through how to create an account, how to submit a request, how to change your login information, all that kind of stuff. Anything that a requester might want to know. The other thing that's coming is that we're working on videos for you guys as well. So those will be tutorials that we'll put throughout the system so that, you know, if you're in the management module and you're confused about anything, there'll be a video there that you can watch that will take you step by step to go with that document.
I'm in a meeting, honey.
For that document that we also provided in the pod. So those changes will be coming soon. So the first thing I want to do is to show you how it will look to a requester. And so I'm going to just log in here as a requester. And I think Lisa's on the phone, and Lisa, I'm going to be acting like a requester for your group today. Okay, so this is how it will look to a requester that logs in. So what they can do, obviously, is limited compared to what you can do in the system. But they can manage their account information, so their password, that sort of thing, and we'll look at that when we log in as a provider. But it's similar to the options that you'll have as a provider. They can submit a TA request, they can view their request, and then they can also access the OJJDP Online University. So one thing that I want to mention is that there's two options for a requester. They can, when we're on that main page, they can submit a request directly without having to log in. And what will happen then is that they hit the submit a request. The system will automatically generate an email, a login for them, and they'll get emailed that login. And then the next time they come in, they will have to log in. And if they try to create a new request as though they don't have a login to the system, it will check their email and remind them that they do have a login, and they can use forgot password and all that kind of stuff. But it's a way that we can track our requesters and keep information about them that you guys can then pull back for reporting purposes. But there is a way to just directly submit TTA without having to create a login. So let's look at the TTA request form. So if I'm a requester, this is going to be my form. Because I've already created a login, because I've already gone through that process, all of my information is going to be here, okay? If I need to update it, I can, and this will pop me back out to my account, which we just looked at. But otherwise, it's always going to store it for me here. If I generally go into a general URL, I've accessed TTA 360 specifically from either the URL OJJDP or maybe I've gone to OJJDP's NTTAC website. Then I'm going to have the ability to pick any provider that OJJDP has. I can also say I don't know, because obviously for a lot of our requesters that come in through OJJDP NTTAC website, they may not know. If they knew, they'd go through your website. If they go through that customized URL that Callie was talking about, this drop-down won't be an option anymore. So if I went to Fox Valley Amber Alert, let's say, I went to that website, this drop-down is only going to have that as my option because I went to their website, I knew I wanted a request from them, so it'll be limited here and it'll tell me who I'm requesting from. The next thing we're going to ask requesters for is the type of TTA they're asking for. And keep in mind, as I'm saying requesters, I understand that some folks don't take requests from the public. If that's the case, then this is all going to be very similar. Then you enter the request on your own. The process is going to be very similar, and I'll show you. And this form will be very similar, and we'll look at that. But so obviously, if I'm saying requesters from the field, I do understand that that does not necessarily apply to everybody. So they're going to select the type of TTA, so information dissemination and referral, conferences, and there's various options under each of this, training, peer sharing, assessment and evaluation. So as Callie said, we spent a lot of time with the groups that piloted for us, and they gave us really, really great feedback. Obviously, as we get into, folks getting more into the system and more folks are using it as we move down the line, if there's stuff that you're seeing repeatedly that, needs to be added, let us know that, and then that's a conversation that we can have with OJJDP about whether we need to make an adjustment. Because obviously the pilot group really helped us out, but, that's a small group of providers. So one of the things that I want to mention is that for information dissemination and referral, some of the good feedback we got from the pilot group was that some of these kind of referral to resources or provision of resources, that sort of thing, responding to information requests, that it didn't make sense to have to fill out a narrative for some of that stuff. So one of the changes we've made is that if it's one of these 3 items here, which may just be a phone call that you have with somebody and they ask for specific resource you have on your website and you provide it to them, you really don't want to have to fill out a big narrative. So what we've done is we've removed the fact that those are mandated fields if you select any of those 3 options. So we'll ask requesters to also pick a target audience, so who's receiving the TA, who's benefiting from it, that sort of thing. And obviously for most of these, there's an option for other. So if it's not on here, you can always enter it in as other. And then training topics. So what is the training on? Is it research to practice, mentoring, youth and family engagement, child safety, delinquency prevention, and obviously, each of these has subcategories as well. So maybe it's delinquency prevention and it's gangs, or it's delinquency prevention and it's also underage drinking. So that just kind of lets us know, lets OJJDP know, lets you run reports on what's being requested of you. And so this is that narrative that I was talking about. The request summary is always going to be required, regardless of what the type of TTA is. And that's because that really tells us what someone is looking for. So a summary of the request, a summary of the training or technical assistance. Were there previous efforts? Has something been done? Let's say it's a law enforcement agency. Have they tried to address this issue before? If so, what were those? What are their goals and outcomes for the request for the training and technical assistance? Are there any specific resources or consultants that they're looking for? They already have in mind. They know somebody that has helped them with this before, and they're looking for that person again. And then, do they have a time frame within 30 days, within 60 days, and they're unsure about their start date? And obviously, this is just what a requester is putting. This is not, this is not necessarily when it's going to happen. And we did add a note that if it requires conference cost reporting, it can take up to 120 days, because we do understand that for some folks, that's the time frame that's needed. And so for a requester or for you, you can then go ahead and either save it as a draft and come back to it later, or you can submit it. And so if a requester went ahead and submitted this, and let's say they did it from your URL, you would get an automatic email notification letting you know that a request had been submitted and that it was there for you to go in and look at. And so like Callie said, if somebody comes through your URL, we're assuming assignment. So it's automatically going to go to you. There's no OJJDP NTTAC involved in that process at all. If it comes through OJJDP NTTAC's website and we assess it with OJJDP and we say, well, we think this makes sense for so-and-so, then what will happen is Callie will go ahead and assign it to you. And again, you'll get an email that says there's a request out there for you to review, and you'll either accept it or decline it. So those are the same. So if a requester does it through your URL and it comes to you, you still have to accept or decline. If Callie assigns you, you have to accept or decline. And I'll show you that module in just a minute. So we'll pop out. I'm actually going to log in as a provider. And one thing I want to mention is that if folks went to, your website previously and didn't come through OJJDP's NTTAC, that's not going to change. It doesn't change the process at all. They're still going to do that. We still may not be involved in any of the receipts of your request. But what the system does allow is that if you were to get a request from the public that didn't fit within your scope, you would then be able to decline it, and it would come back to OJJDP's NTTAC, and we would try and find another provider that could do that. And so it's just helping the field to not have things kind of fall through the cracks or to say, well, this isn't good for us, and then they don't know where to go. So, okay, this is a look as if I'm a provider, and you'll see that it has a couple extra modules that the requester didn't have. So again, you can submit TTA requests, and the form is very similar. The difference is that I have to enter in the requester's information here, and I do that here by just saying update requester information. I'm not going to be able to select multiple providers because I'm myself, so there's a provider that I'm going to go ahead and select. And the same thing. So if I'm receiving an email request by email or by telephone, I can go ahead and enter in all the data that a requester would in just the same way. And I can still save it as a draft and come back to it later if I'm not done, or I can go ahead and submit it. Now, the difference here is that if I, as a provider, enter a request myself, the system assumes acceptance. And we'll look at the accept module in a minute. But so what that means is that you don't then have to submit something and then go into your accept module and then accept it if you've filled it out yourself. We assume that if you're putting a TA in here for your project, you're accepting that TA. Go back up. Okay. So the view TTA request is similar to requesters. There's no drafts in here for this one. If there were drafts in here, then they would be listed here much like they're listed here. And so what this does is it just allows me to view a record. I can make edits to it if I want to. I can edit it here. And also on this main view page, if I just wanted to get a look at everything I have in the system, I can just export this to Excel. And it would just give me a really basic rundown of everything I have in the system. So you'll see that I can also sort this list by types of training, by the state requesting it. But if I know what TTA number, I've got my automatic email and it says that it's TA 56 and I just want to find it, I can go ahead and put 56 in here and find, and it's going to find that for me. Because obviously this page could theoretically get pretty big. So that's the view request. So this is the accept and TTA request module that I was talking about. So this is where requests will go after, and you'll see there's none in here for to be accepted. After Callie has assigned it, if it's come through us, or if a requester has gone through your URL and requested it, it will go to this accept decline TTA request. So the automatic email that you get will give you a link directly into this page. It'll tell you that you need to go in and accept or decline it. So you can see that here on my TAs that have been accepted, if I had some that were waiting for me, they'd be here. But you can see that Lisa's cleared those out. So I can filter these as well. So I can filter by TA number, by TA type, state, the status, if it's on hold or not, and you'll see that you can put a TA on hold in the management module, which we'll get to in a moment, or the dates that they were submitted. So if I know the date range I'm looking for when a TA came in, I can go ahead and put the date range in. Or if I'm looking for only TAs that came in the month of January, I can look at that here too. The reason TTA provider is here is because we may have some folks that work on multiple projects. If you work for an organization that has multiple projects for OJJDP, we don't want you to have to log in for one and then log in to get out to another one. So, so what this does is this drop down would then show every project that you have access to so that you could manage it that way. But for most folks, TA provider is just going to be you, just your one project. Okay, so let's look at, so these have all been accepted. So I can jump straight into the management module from here if I wanted to. And I can also access it from the dashboard, which we're going to do. If I had any requests to be accepted here, I would review it, and then it's going to give me a full look at the page, and I'll just hit accept or decline. And the only thing that will happen is if I accept it, it'll go ahead and send an email to my OJJDP project manager to let them know I've accepted it. And if I decline it, it's going to ask for a reason that you decline it. And so what we do have is a drop down that gives you a couple options. You know, for instance, it's not in the scope of your work. You know, maybe it should actually go to another TTA provider. And then you'll go ahead and hit decline. And what that will do is it'll send it back to us at OJJDP NTTAC, and we'll take another look at it and say, okay, well, is there another provider that can do this work? So let's look at the managed request. Okay, so this is probably where you're going to do the most of your work on request, because this is where you can really document what's happening with the request, add tasks and all that kind of stuff we'll look at. And obviously, theoretically, this page could grow to be pretty huge as well, and especially if you have requesters that have checked off everything. So you can, again, you can manage by TA number, or you can, filter by TA number, the type of TA, the current status of the TA. So once you've accepted a request, it's going to go into in progress status. Before that, you'll see it appear as the status as assigned, not accepted. And so that means that it's assigned to you. It's within your wheelhouse to either approve or accept or decline, but you haven't done so yet. And so those are the statuses you'll see most often. And obviously there's a draft status as well. You can sort by topics, subtopics, whether it's on hold, the timing of request, date submitted, a lot of the theme filters, the type of organization, so what type of requesting organization, you can sort that way, and you can sort by state. And so that'll just give you a result. So the system by default sorts by state in alphabetical order. If you don't have any for a specific state, then the state won't appear. So obviously the first state that we have here is Florida, so that's why you see it first. So if I want to manage a request, I go ahead and go into management. And the top of the page is just going to give me a little bit of information about the request, the number, what type of training it is, the requester information. If I need to contact them, it's right there for me. And then I have these tabs along the bottom. And once we pop out of the walkthrough, I'll talk to you about 2 additional tabs that we're working on. So the first one is the full request. And this is just the entire request as it's been submitted to you. The thing that you can do on this page is obviously you can edit any information about the request, because I'm sure for most of us it happens that often requesters don't necessarily know exactly what they want, so they may fill out the request. In order to have better detail, you want to go back in and change it later. Or, if you receive it through email and you do it yourself, maybe it changes later on, and so you want to go and make edits. The other thing that you can do here is you can change the date that the TTA request was submitted. And so obviously this is important for requests that you may receive through email or by phone. You don't always enter them the day that you got them, obviously. So what this allows you to do in the management module is to go in and to change this date. So, maybe I entered it on the 17th, but it actually came in a week before that. I just didn't have time to get it into the system. So I can go ahead and make an adjustment to that date if I need to. The other thing I can do is I can change the title. So the system defaults the title to the TTA request number, which that's not changeable. That's automatically generated from the system, and that's how we make sure we don't have duplicates. And then the name of the requesting organization, and then the type of training they've requested. So you can leave that if you want, but if you have your own naming mechanism that you already use, then you can go ahead and just make a change to the request title here, so you don't have to change that naming mechanism. The request details tab. So these are additional data points that are required by OJP. So everything in this tab is required, and that goes for whatever kind of request comes in. And again, the reason for that is because these are the data points that the Office of Justice Programs is going to be looking for OJJDP to provide. So we have to be able to provide this information to them. And so the first is engagement and intensity. So if you were to do something like we talked about dissemination of information, so providing a resource to somebody, that's universal, it's ongoing, it's low intensity. Targeted, TA is designed to deliver to a group of recipients with similar needs. Tailored is intensive and designed to customize to specific individualized need and organization. So, the definitions of what this means for your group may change, but this is just a way that OJJDP can start to get a sense of what kind of TTA is happening out in the field. So some of the other things are requesters' congressional district. There is a drop down for this, and I know that I'm sure most folks don't know this, but with a requester's zip code, you can go ahead and click on this link, and it's going to open up a search that allows you to search for the congressional district by zip code. You'll see tax budgets. We'll look at tax in a second. Total budget, or perhaps there is no budget needed for this particular, then I can go ahead and knock that off. Full period of performance. So when is the TTA happening? When is the, this might, for some folks, this might span an entire year because you're doing really intensive work with a group and you're, having multiple visits or you're having multiple calls. For some folks, this may be a single day. Maybe it's a conference and it's 1 day or 2 days. So it's just the full length of the actual request, the actual TTA. How many people attended it? So how many people are we serving? OJJDP is really looking to find out the number of people that are getting served with the assistance they provide. Are there other agencies? And so if there were other agencies, because oftentimes the requesting agency might be there, but they might be partnering with other groups. If they are partnering with other groups and they've received it, then you'll go ahead and enter that in here. Is the physical address of the TA different from the requester's address? So maybe where it took place is different from when it was actually requested. This is going to become really important because one of the things that we're working towards is some geo-mapping, and so being able to show exactly where OJJDP's training and technical assistance is happening in the country or internationally, depending on the kind of work that you do. And then is the training evidence-based, yes or no? So if it is, I'm going to provide an explanation for that. And then I save it. So anytime I make changes to any of these tabs, I need to go ahead and save it. They don't have to be completed until I'm ready to close the TA request, and we'll look at that in a second. I'll show you that. My scope and outcomes, again, these are OJJDP data points. So I'm going to add the scope of the request. Really simple. I just go ahead and put in the data, and then I save it. I can add as many outcomes as I need to. So these are projected outcomes, so I'll give the outcome a title. I'll give it a description, and then a goal. So, we provide these in drop-downs here. So maybe it was to change policy and practice, improve direct service, whatever it may be, or maybe it's other, and then I'll provide the other. If I had tasks created on this particular training, I would also be able to associate an outcome to a task. And we'll talk about tasks in just a second. So I'm going to cancel that out. Okay. So tasks would be used if you have a TTA request that, again, maybe it spans a year and it's multiple activities, it's multiple visits out to a jurisdiction, it's multiple, or maybe it's a visit and also a webinar, whatever it may be. Tasks allow you to have one TTA, but to keep track of all of those activities separately. So I can add a task here. I'm going to add the name of the task, the description, the status, and you'll see status here, not started, in progress, complete, on hold. And this just allows me to, know that I've gotten through. So if my first task is a site visit, but I finished that and I still have a webinar, I can go ahead and say that my site visit is complete, and I'll still have a webinar in my task that maybe is in progress or it hasn't started yet. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the type. So let's say, since we said this was a visit, we're going to say it's a training, and it is a train the trainer. Okay, so that was one of my tasks. And then I can have a period of performance that's different from my entire request period of performance. So like I said, if maybe my TTA spans an entire year, but this particular task is a 2-day event, then I go ahead and put that here. And then I would go ahead and put a budget, or if there's not a budget needed, then it's going to go there. And back on the request details where we saw that task, once I put this budget in here, it's going to automatically drop that amount into the request details. And that'll just help you so that if you've used tasks and then you don't have to go and figure out the entire budget yourself, you'll have the budget there. So I would go ahead and add my task and then save it. And again, I can add as many tasks as I need to. Or if I don't have any tasks, if the TPA is a one-shot deal, then I don't need to add a task. It's not required. The activity feed, again, is another tab that isn't required, but we're hoping will help folks out. And that just allows me to put notes on it. So perhaps my activity was that I had a conference call with the requester to kind of gauge their initial needs and figure out, where we go from here. I'd go ahead and put that information here. I can attach a file if I need to. There's several places within the system that you'll see that you can attach files. And then we'll talk in a second about the tab that is in the works that will help you manage those files. But maybe there was an agenda for your meeting, that your conference call, and so you just want to attach that agenda so you can remember what you talked about. Or maybe you want to attach the notes from that meeting. You can go ahead and do that. And, oftentimes I think sometimes that we do activities and we don't get to adding it in that day, so I can change the date if I need to. If I actually talked to them 2 days ago and I'm just now getting in to put the notes in, I can go ahead and do that. And then I would go ahead and post it. I can also add barriers. And the cool thing about barriers is that, let's say my barrier is that, the requester has been unresponsive to me for 2 weeks. Then I can go ahead and put in requester unresponsive from, and then go ahead and list the date. And then once my barrier has been resolved, there'll be a little mark that allows me to check off that the barrier is resolved, and I'll add a note in. And so it just kind of helps folks so that, if the TTA request has been closed for some time, you've kind of forgotten about it, but then your program manager says, well, wait a minute, why was that request open for, a year and a half or 6 months or whatever it is? You can go back in and look at the activity feed and go, well, the requester was unresponsive for a full month of that. And you just have a way to kind of check it out and remember what happened on a request after time has passed. And then the third option is a monthly status. And so what this allows you to do is just, if you don't take notes, that's something that you guys don't do as often as, every time you have contact, you don't note it, and you just want to be able to track kind of where a request is monthly and then be able to pull that in a report, you'll be able to do that here. So I can have my monthly status, and I just say what month and year it belonged to, and I go ahead and put it in. And if I had any activity barriers or monthly statuses, they'd be here, and I can filter. So again, obviously this page could get very large if I'm tracking things. So I could say I just want to see my activities. I would tell it to find it, or I'm only looking for monthly statuses. I just want to look. It was open for a full year, and I want to see where it was, each month throughout the year, I can go ahead and do that. And so on this page, the other two tabs that are getting added is one that's going to be called Documents, and that's in development right now. And what Documents will do exactly what it sounds like it does. Anytime where you can add a file or a requester can add a file, because the requester can add a file when they're submitting a TA request, Documents will show you every file that is attached to this request. It'll allow you to delete them. It'll allow you to add new ones. So maybe if you do some sort of evaluation, you could upload them there. Or like I said, if you keep notes about any of your conference calls or your meetings, anything you really want document-wise can be added. And then the other tab that's being added is one that's called People. And what People does is it just lets you see who has access to your record. So who can view and edit your record. So for the most part, it's going to be your program manager and also anyone else in your project that's also using the system. So the other thing that you can do in management is this is where you would close a request or mark it on hold, excuse me. And if the request was closed, you'd be able to reopen it here too. So if I want to put a request on hold, it's going to ask me for the reason why I'm putting it on hold at this time, just so I can, again, track that later on. And I'd go ahead and give my reason, and I tell it to mark it on hold. I can also close a request here. So there's two ways that I can close a request. I can close it because it was satisfied, the work is done, we fulfilled the request, and if that was the case, I'd go ahead and do this. Now, because all of these tabs are empty, specifically full request obviously is not empty, that's complete, but request details and scope and outcome, those two tabs that are required OJJDP data points, what happens if I tried to close this satisfied right now and mark it as closed, it's going to tell me that I have things missing, it's going to drop me to that tab, and it's going to point out everywhere where I have data missing. So it's really helpful just because it points it out to you. So you don't have to go search, let's say you missed one thing. You don't have to go search for that one thing. It'll pull up the tab and it'll point to where you're missing information. If I want to close other, then I don't have to worry about, the same stuff. Because obviously if I'm closing other, the reason I close it might be a duplicate TA. A requester might have gotten confused and put something in twice, the same exact TA. I might have gotten confused and put something in twice. Whatever the reason may be, or, we have some drop down, obviously. So maybe the requester just was never responsive again. I know for some folks that happens. Maybe your program manager said, no, you know what, this doesn't look good for us. This doesn't make sense for the project. So it was declined by OJJDP. And while we're talking about that, this has come up before, so I just want to say that whatever your process is currently with your program manager, to make sure that to have approval, this is not meant to change that in any way. So if your program manager, expects that you're doing exactly what they've asked you to do, and you don't have to take every single request to them for approval, then that will stay the same. If your project manager at OJJDP, your program manager, at OJJDP likes to see the request and give their okay before you perform work, then that's still, nothing's going to change. But this is a reason, this is a way that if that happened, you could go in and say, okay, well, I talked to my program manager and it doesn't work for us. Maybe it's not within the scope of your work. Maybe it should be assigned to another provider. And so these are those ones that we were talking about, that there's several of these that will go ahead and pop the request back to us, and Callie will take another look at it with OJJDP's TTA group and decide, well, is there somebody else that this can go to? Maybe the requester withdrew it, it's a duplicate, or there's another reason that you're closing it. And so if I do close other, then obviously these kind of required fields aren't going to be required anymore because you're not going to have some of that data. And so then I just mark the request as closed. And if I had marked this one as closed, this box would now say reopen request. Obviously, if you're doing new work that wasn't within the scope of the original request, you should probably open a new TA request to make sure that you're getting credit for every request that you're doing to make sure that we're tracking it properly. But I know there's oftentimes maybe you closed it by accident, or maybe you closed it and there was still work to do on it. So you can always reopen it there. I'm going to go back out to home. So the last two here are standard reports and custom reports. And so right now there's one report in each of these. Obviously, as we move along, the idea is that we'll be able to add more reports to it. to both of these pieces. But standard report, the one that is in there now is a pending TTA request report. And you can see because I'm logged in as Lisa, Lisa Hutchinson, I only have myself as the option here. This is how it will appear to everybody. Your project will be here. I'll select a date range, and what this report does is it gives me a report of every TTA that is in progress and on. So everything that I have except for closed TAs, that's why it's called pending. So they're all open, they're currently active, they're not closed. So that will give me every TA that I have that's in pending status. So I'm doing something with it, it's not closed. And what it'll do is it'll give me the summary of the request, the type of TTA, it'll give me the status of it, it'll give me the date it was received. And then what's in development currently is that number 3 here will be that I can add the last activity feed note if you're using that activity feed that we just looked at, the last barrier, or the last monthly status. So maybe I want to see all the TA requests that I have pending, and I also want to see the last note that was made for each of those. So I can kind of get a sense of what's going on for them. Then that piece is in development right now, and so that'll be here shortly, and you'll be able to check those off and add them. And then I can just export it to Excel. In custom reports, the report we have now is the TTA characteristics report. And this report will change a little bit in the next couple weeks. So it'll look a little different, but it'll be the same functionality. So what this does is this pretty much allows me to pull for almost any of the data that we're keeping. So I can select the date range, and this is everything. So this, if I don't click any of these filters, I'm going to get every single TTA request that is there for my project. I'm going to get that as a result. Closed, draft status, everything. If I'm only looking for things that are in progress, then I go here to status and I select in progress. If I want to see everything that is closed status by, so I want to see all the TTA requests that we've completed, I can go ahead and do that, and it'll give me all of that. So again, if I don't select anything here on this top one, number 1, I will get everything. If I want to narrow it down, then I need to select a date range, or I need to select a type of TTA or topic perhaps. And I can select multiple. So maybe I only want conferences closed satisfied. That's all I'm looking for. So I can go ahead and narrow it that way. Or I'm only looking for TTA requests that happen in Alabama. I can do it that way. Now, for number 2, if I don't check any of these off, I don't get any of them. So these are the extra detail points. So the report will run with all of this information. So the report will run with the date. This is date submitted, by the way. It'll run with the type of TTA and then the underlying task. If I did conferences and then it was a conference planning. It'll run topic, subtopic, status, organization, audience type, and state. But if I want to add some of these other pieces on, so I want all of that, and then I also want to know the budget, or I also want to know the number of participants, then I go ahead and check any of these that I'm looking for off. Maybe I need to know the county, the country, because we had some folks let us know that they do some stuff outside of the country.